Meghan Markle associated to people who are bankrupt, corrupt, are being sued right, left, and center. And by the way, the woman inviting her to Australia is about to become homeless.
Something shifted, and this time, it's not just palace whispers. Within days, Meghan Markle's carefully staged comeback began collapsing from every direction. A cancelled Australia tour, a shocking exposé from Variety, and insiders finally breaking their silence. What looked like a power move is now spiraling into something far more damaging. The collapse no one saw coming. At first, it looked like just another headline, another announcement, another carefully staged move meant to reposition Meghan Markle back into the spotlight. A luxury women's retreat in Australia. High ticket prices. Exclusive access. A Duchess experience designed to signal power, influence, relevance. But within hours, something felt off. Because behind the polished headlines, behind the glamorous branding, cracks were already forming, and they were forming fast. This wasn't just a retreat. This was supposed to be a comeback. And then, everything started unraveling. The Australia trip, quietly hyped as Meghan's next big step into global influence, suddenly began facing resistance. Not just criticism, but rejection. Reports surfaced that the public response wasn't excitement. It was backlash. Petitions began circulating. Voices grew louder. And the question shifted from, when is she arriving, to, why is she coming at all? But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was what was happening behind the scenes. Because as more details emerged, the entire foundation of this luxury retreat began to look less like a premium experience, and more like a desperate gamble. Tickets were reportedly priced in the thousands. Expectations were sky high. The branding promised exclusivity, elegance, transformation. But the reality? It didn't match. And when reality doesn't match expectation, that's when things start to fall apart. Fast. Then came the first twist. The woman organizing the entire event, someone meant to represent credibility, professionalism, trust, was suddenly at the center of serious financial controversy. Questions began swirling. Background details started surfacing. And just like that, the narrative shifted again. This wasn't just about Meghan anymore. This was about who she was choosing to align with. And why? Because patterns were beginning to repeat. Associations raising eyebrows. Projects launching under pressure. And outcomes that never quite landed the way they were supposed to. And just when it seemed like the situation couldn't get more uncomfortable, it did. Because Meghan Markle, the face of the entire event, reportedly went silent. No statements. No clarifications. No control of the narrative. Just silence. And that silence, it spoke louder than anything else. Because when everything is going according to plan, Meghan is known for precision, for messaging, for carefully crafted appearances. But when things begin to collapse, something very different happens. She disappears. And this time, the timing couldn't have been worse. Because while the Australia situation was already spiraling, something much bigger was about to drop. Something far more damaging. Something that would take this story from a failed event to a full-scale credibility crisis. Variety. Not a tabloid. Not gossip. Not speculation. But one of the most powerful voices in Hollywood. And what they were about to reveal would change everything. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about a cancelled trip. It wasn't just about a retreat falling apart. It was about a pattern. A pattern that insiders, executives, and even former allies were no longer willing to ignore. And as the pressure began building from every direction, Australia, Hollywood, media, insiders, one question started echoing louder than ever before. Is this just another setback? Or is this the moment everything finally catches up? Because what happens next? No one saw coming. When Hollywood stops playing along. If Australia was the warning sign, Hollywood was the confirmation. Because just as the retreat controversy was beginning to spiral out of control, something far more dangerous surfaced. Something Meghan Markle could not ignore, spin, or quietly walk away from. Variety spoke. And when Variety speaks, the entire industry listens. This wasn't gossip. This wasn't speculation. This was insiders, people inside the rooms, inside the meetings, inside the deals, finally pulling back the curtain on what had really been happening behind closed doors for years. And what they revealed. It didn't just raise eyebrows. It changed the narrative completely. Because according to multiple insiders, the mood surrounding Meghan and Prince Harry inside Netflix wasn't just tense. It was finished. 5.5 years. Multi-million-dollar deals. Endless expectations. And now, quietly but firmly, the message coming from within one of the most powerful companies in the world was simple. We're done. Let that sink in. This was the same platform that once positioned them as the future of royal storytelling. The same deal that was supposed to redefine their identity beyond the monarchy. The same partnership that gave them global reach, influence, and, most importantly, credibility. And now, that credibility was being questioned from the inside. But here's where it gets even more revealing. Because it wasn't just about failed projects or underwhelming results. It was about behavior. Multiple reports suggested that during meetings, both virtual and in person, Meghan would often take control in ways that left executives uncomfortable. Conversations would shift. Dynamics would change. And Prince Harry? He would reportedly be interrupted, redirected, managed. Not publicly, not dramatically, but subtly, consistently. A touch on the arm. A shift in tone. A quiet signal that the direction of the conversation had changed. And insiders noticed. Because in Hollywood, perception is everything. And once a pattern is noticed, it's never unseen. Suddenly, the image of a united power couple began to fracture. What was once marketed as a partnership started to look unbalanced, controlled, carefully managed behind the scenes in ways that didn't match the public narrative. And that created discomfort. Because Hollywood doesn't just invest in talent. It invests in people it can work with. Then came another twist, one that made the situation even more serious. Reports emerged that even top-level executives were growing distant. Communication that once felt direct and open was now becoming formal, guarded, filtered, and in an industry built on relationships, that shift is everything. Because when doors start closing quietly, they rarely reopen. But perhaps the most damaging detail wasn't even about meetings or dynamics. It was about output. Because alongside all of this, questions were growing louder about what had actually been delivered. Projects that didn't land. Ideas that never fully materialized. Promises that failed to convert into long-term success. And inside Netflix, that matters. Because in the end, no matter how powerful your name is, results are the only currency that counts. And if the results aren't there, the support disappears. Fast. Now here's the part that makes this even more intense. Because while all of this was unfolding inside Hollywood, while executives were pulling back, while insiders were speaking out, while credibility was quietly eroding, Meghan was still trying to build something new. Australia. The retreat. The rebrand. But now, those two worlds were colliding. And not in a good way. Because suddenly, the questions weren't just about one failed event. They were about a bigger picture. A pattern of launches followed by setbacks. A cycle of announcements followed by silence. A growing gap between expectation and reality. And once that gap becomes visible, it becomes impossible to ignore. So now, the situation had escalated. Australia was falling apart. Hollywood was stepping back. And Meghan Markle was standing in the middle of it all, with pressure building from every direction. But just when it seemed like this story had reached its peak, another name entered the conversation. A name that doesn't speculate. A name that doesn't guess. A name that investigates and proves. Tom Bauer. And what he was about to release would push this entire situation into something far more explosive. Because this time, it wasn't just insiders talking. It was evidence. And once that comes out, there's no controlling it. The book that changes everything. Just when it seemed like the pressure couldn't intensify any further, it did. Because as Australia continued to unravel and Hollywood quietly pulled back, a new force entered the story. One that doesn't rely on whispers, speculation, or anonymous sources. It relies on documentation, verification, and consequences. Tom Bower. Now, this isn't just another commentator or critic adding noise to an already chaotic situation. Tom Bower has built a reputation on one thing, and one thing only: going after powerful figures with evidence strong enough to withstand legal scrutiny. He doesn't publish rumors. He publishes what can't be easily denied. And this time, his focus returned directly to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. The title alone was enough to send ripples through both media and royal circles: betrayal. But it wasn't the title that made people uneasy. It was what insiders were saying about what's inside. Because before the book had even fully landed in public hands, excerpts and early details began surfacing, and the reaction was immediate. Tension, silence, and something even more telling: defensiveness. Because rather than ignoring the claims, rather than dismissing them entirely, there were signs, subtle but noticeable, that the Sussex camp was paying very close attention. And in moments like this, that reaction matters. Because when something is truly irrelevant, it's ignored. But when something hits close to the truth, it triggers response. And that's exactly what began to happen. One of the most talked about revelations centered not just on Meghan, but on Harry himself. A portrayal that didn't align with the carefully constructed public image. A version of events that painted a far more complicated, far more conflicted picture behind the scenes. And suddenly, the narrative shifted again. Because this wasn't just about Meghan's decisions anymore. It was about the dynamic between them. A dynamic that, according to multiple accounts, had changed dramatically over time. From independence to influence. From partnership to dependency. And that shift, it raised questions people had been quietly asking for years, but never had confirmed at this level. Then came the moment that truly caught attention. A reported claim that echoed through royal circles, a private opinion, allegedly shared within the highest levels of the monarchy, suggesting that Harry had been fundamentally changed. Not guided, not supported, changed. And whether people believed it or not wasn't the point. The point was that it was now being said out loud, publicly, and backed by a writer known for not taking risks unless he can defend them. That's what made this different. Because criticism can be dismissed. But documented patterns? They're much harder to escape. And as these details began circulating, something else happened. Something quieter, but just as significant. People started connecting the dots. The exit from royal duties. The strained family relationships. The public interviews. The deals, the breakdowns, the repeated attempts to rebuild a brand that never quite stabilized. Individually, each moment could be explained. But together, they started to form a pattern. And once a pattern becomes visible, it changes how every future move is interpreted. Because now, everything Meghan does, everything Harry does, is no longer seen in isolation. It's seen through context, through history, through accumulated perception. And that is one of the hardest things to reverse. But here's where the situation becomes even more intense. Because while this book was gaining attention, while discussions were spreading, while narratives were shifting, Meghan was still dealing with the fallout from Australia. Still facing questions from Hollywood. Still trying to maintain control of a story that was slipping further away by the day. And now, with Tom Bower's work entering the conversation, the pressure wasn't just external anymore. It was layered, relentless, and building. Because for the first time, this wasn't just about public opinion. It was about credibility across multiple fronts: media, industry, and monarchy, all converging at the same time. And when that happens, it's no longer a temporary setback. It becomes a defining moment. So now the situation had reached a critical point. Australia was collapsing. Netflix was distancing. The book was spreading. And Meghan Markle was running out of space to maneuver. But just when it seemed like the story had revealed everything, another twist emerged. One that didn't come from Hollywood, or from a biographer, but from something far more unpredictable. The public itself, and what they decided to do next. No one in Meghan's camp was prepared for. When the public turns, and there's nowhere left to hide. Up until this point, everything could still be explained away. Media bias, industry politics, personal attacks. That had always been the strategy. Shift the narrative, question the motive, control the framing. But what happens when the backlash doesn't come from the media? What happens when it comes from the public itself? Because that's exactly what started happening next. And this time, it was different. This wasn't a headline. This wasn't a report. This was a reaction. Real people. Real voices. And a response that couldn't be filtered, edited, or dismissed as easily as before. Australia, the very place that was supposed to host Meghan's carefully planned return, was now becoming the center of something far more uncomfortable. Rejection. Not quiet resistance. Not mild criticism. But organized, visible pushback. Petitions began circulating, rapidly gaining traction. Thousands of signatures turned into tens of thousands. And then, something even more telling happened. The tone changed. Because this wasn't just about the retreat anymore. It became about trust. About perception. About how Meghan, and by extension Harry, were now being seen by a public that had once welcomed them with open arms. And that contrast, it mattered. Because when they visited Australia years ago, it was a completely different story. They were received as representatives of the monarchy. There was curiosity, excitement, even admiration. But now, that sentiment had shifted. And once public sentiment changes, it rarely goes back to what it was. But here's where things take an even sharper turn. Because alongside the petitions and backlash, old stories began resurfacing. Moments from past visits. Allegations. Incidents that, at the time, were either downplayed or quietly moved past, were now being re-examined under a completely different lens. And suddenly, those moments didn't feel isolated anymore. They felt connected. Because when perception shifts, the past doesn't stay in the past. It gets pulled into the present and reinterpreted. That's exactly what was happening. Stories of uncomfortable interactions. Reports of tension behind the scenes. Questions about behavior that, at the time, didn't fully break through the surface. Now, they were being discussed openly. And more importantly, they were being believed. Because the context had changed. And that made all the difference. But perhaps the most damaging part of all of this wasn't even the backlash itself. It was the symbolism. Because Meghan's entire strategy, every move, every project, every appearance, has been built around perception, around influence, around maintaining an image of control, success, and forward momentum. And now, that image was cracking. Publicly, globally, in real time. Because when a luxury event collapses before it even begins, when a major industry partner starts stepping back, when a high-profile book begins reshaping the narrative, and when the public itself starts pushing back, it creates a convergence, a moment where everything aligns at once. And those moments, they're dangerous, because they don't just damage reputation, they redefine it. Now, Meghan Markle wasn't just dealing with criticism. She was dealing with a shift in how she was being perceived across multiple audiences. Hollywood, the public, and even those who had once remained neutral. And the most difficult part? She couldn't control all of them at the same time. So the pressure kept building. From every direction. Relentless. And now, the situation had reached a point where every possible move carried risk. If she moved forward with Australia, it risked embarrassment. If she cancelled, it risked exposure. If she stayed silent, it fed speculation. If she spoke out, it invited scrutiny. Every option came with consequences. And that's when you know the situation has escalated beyond control. But just when it seemed like this was the breaking point, the moment where everything finally collapses, there was one final layer to uncover. Because behind all the headlines, behind all the backlash, behind all the controversy, there was a bigger question. A question that hadn't fully been answered yet. And once it is, it doesn't just explain what's happening now. It explains everything. And that's where this story takes its final turn. The moment everything connects. And now, we arrive at the part of the story that changes how everything before it is understood. Because what we've seen so far, Australia collapsing, Hollywood stepping back, insiders speaking out, public backlash growing, it all feels like separate crises happening at the same time. But they're not separate. They're connected. And once you see the connection, you can't unsee it. Because this isn't just a bad week for Meghan Markle. This is the result of a pattern. A pattern that has been quietly building for years. Think about it. Every major move has followed the same cycle. Announcement, anticipation, attention. And then, slowly, something begins to unravel. A deal loses momentum. A project fails to land. A partnership weakens. And just when questions start rising, silence, disappearance, reset, and then the cycle begins again. But this time, there is no reset, because for the first time, everything is happening at once. Australia didn't just fail, it exposed decision-making. Netflix didn't just distance, it exposed credibility. Tom Bauer didn't just write a book, it exposed patterns. And the public didn't just react, it confirmed perception. This is what makes this moment different. Because when one issue happens, it can be controlled. When two happen, it can be managed. But when everything happens together, it becomes a reckoning. And that's exactly what we're witnessing now. A convergence of pressure from every direction. Media, industry, public, and history, all pointing toward the same uncomfortable conclusion. The brand isn't holding. Because at the core of everything Meghan and Harry built after leaving the royal family was one central idea: independence, freedom, the ability to create, to lead, to succeed on their own terms. But what we're seeing now raises a difficult question. What happens when that independence doesn't produce stability? Because strip away the headlines, the titles, the announcements, and what remains? Projects that didn't sustain. Partnerships that didn't last. Momentum that couldn't be maintained. And a growing gap between what is promised and what is delivered. And here's the most critical part of all of this. The one thing that changes everything. The only reason Meghan and Harry ever had this level of global influence was because of their connection to the royal family. That was the foundation. That was the leverage. That was the attention. And every time they move further away from that foundation, the outcomes become weaker, not stronger. Which leads to the question no one in their circle wants to answer out loud. What happens next? Because now, the stakes are higher than ever. There are no easy wins left. No guaranteed support. No unquestioned credibility. Every move from this point forward will be judged differently. More critically. More carefully. And far less forgivingly. So now we're left at a turning point. Not just for Meghan Markle, but for the entire narrative she's built. Does she attempt another reinvention? Does she double down? Or does something finally shift behind the scenes in a way we haven't seen yet? Because one thing is certain. This moment, it's not just another controversy. It's a crossroads. And what happens next will define everything that comes after. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think this Australia trip was ever really going to happen? Or was it always heading toward collapse? And more importantly, do you think this is just another phase? Or the beginning of something much bigger? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because stories like this, they're far from over. And the next chapter might be even bigger.